Here's another how-to question. I'd like to know how you would paint a cloud shadow cast on beach sand. That sounds a little bit elusive, doesn't it? Well, let's explore some possibilities. Okay, here it comes. Not how to paint a cloud shadow on beach sand, but how to find the colors and what kinds of brush strokes and that sort of thing. What are you seeing? And what would it take to translate what you're seeing? Well, one way to figure that one out is to use the color wheel. I always refer to the color wheel. It doesn't matter what it is. The color wheel is our key, our key instrument, you might say, for helping us to figure things out. Now, color contains 3 parts, and all 3 of those parts is included in every single color you look at. There is the hue of the color. That's the name of the color. We're used to calling color, but it's not all there is to it. There's the value of the color, and there is the intensity or the saturation of the hue. That may sound very contorted, know how I would figure all that out. Well, the color will guide you on that. So let's try going at it like this. First of all, if we don't know the color, we won't know what to do about it. What are we looking at? Now, no 2 clouds cast on beach sand are going to be the same. In fact, I'm not quite sure what the person was imagining when they asked that question. But could we say that perhaps because we see clouds in the sky here, perhaps there might be a cloud blocking the sun about right in here, or is the beach sand just wet? We don't really know, but we would do the color analysis and we would do the brush work pretty much the same way. Now we look at a scene like this where the sun is obviously setting, and we're seeing things happen here, but how do you figure that out? Okay, you use the same process no matter what time of day it is, no matter what kind of shadows being cast on the beach, you use the same process. So if we look first of all in the area where the light is hitting, what colors are we seeing? Now this photograph probably is not the color we would see if we were there. It may be or it may not be, but this is what we're working with, and so that's what we'll figure. Not what we think we would see, but what we are actually looking at. So if you're on the beach, you would take the approach of what you see, not what you know, or not some formula somebody has given you. All right, so what hue are we seeing here? Well, we certainly aren't seeing blue there. The color wheel doesn't really ring there. We might feel that we're seeing a little bit of red violet there. We might feel that we're seeing a little bit of orange there, or a little bit of red, violet, and orange. So that's where we might start. But it's not the same. It doesn't feel the same because this is highly saturated and this is lowly saturated. This is a high intensity and this is a low intensity. So what do we know? What do we know about how to change that? We can always go across the opposite side of the color wheel and add whatever colors are opposite to whatever we think we're reading, and we will get close to the color. Now let me show you what I'm talking about here. Let's assume we are right in here, and let's say, okay, I really am feeling that as more or less red violet. I'm really feeling more red violet there than I am the orange or the red orange. So red violet, I've got red violet right here. What value is it? So I might say this is an obvious red violet, so I'll just put this right here just to show you how we figure that out, right there. Now, red violet, opposite the color wheel red violet, is yellow green. And the value of this, if I put this, we can see is a little bit darker than what we're seeing there. But what if I start right here and add just a little bit of yellow green? Now you may say that doesn't make sense, but I said a little bit, not much. So if we add just a little bit of red violet to that, a little bit of yellow green to that red violet, then we will come up with something like this. Maybe I added a little bit too much, so let's add not quite so much, and we will come up with something like this. Now, isn't that very close to what we're seeing right here? If we add a little bit, we can see that's a darker value, so let's add just a little bit of white to that and raise the value. And then let's see what we have. So if I put my brush, you see there, it's very, very close to what we're seeing here. And then we will know, there it is right there. We will know, oh, that's very close to what we're seeing right here. I might be able to get that just a little bit, but it really varies. It feels a little bit violet in some areas, maybe a little bit more green in others. That's the reason you don't just jump for yellow ochre, which a lot of people will do when they're going to do sand. Regardless of what the light's doing, or regardless of what their eyes might be perceiving, people will automatically consider sand yellow ochre. Well, doesn't it work better if you really want to translate that color? Doesn't it make more sense to really figure what you're seeing, really be able to locate what you're seeing, and then be able to translate close to what you're seeing? Now, what happens in shadow? So we've got that much figured, or pretty close to that much figured, and we see lots of texture in that. Well, I'm just looking for color. I'm not looking for texture here. What happens when something falls into shadow? The light gets deprived from it. And when sand is wet like that, it doesn't have the reflective quality that it has when it's dry. So we will see wet sand often take on the same characteristic as in shadow. And what we'll do there is to remember that when something falls in shadow, the light gets deprived, gets a little cooler, and it gets, we add just maybe a bit more of the complement to it. Shadows are always a little bit darker because it's being deprived of light. So value-wise, we see this is about maybe 1 or 2 degrees darker here than it is here. And so what we can do there then is to go for a slightly darker hue or slightly darker color that is a little cooler. So if it's a little cooler, it would have a little blue in it. So let's go right in here again. This is what we're dealing with, so I'll reach for a little bit of blue for a darker value. And now because that blue by itself, well, let's just test it out, that blue by itself. You see I put it right there. Now this begins to take on, because if I added the yellow green to it, it begins to take on a little bit more yellow into it, and therefore begins to take on a little bit more orange. And that might seem a little bit contradictory, but you can see here that by putting just a little bit of that blue, and the blue has a little yellow in it too, it's a blue that leans towards blue-green. So using the color wheel like that, see, we can use, when we get something like the red-violet, then we can move in this direction right here for getting that shadow color. So we can go directly across and then come back towards the cool, and we can find a color that will give us what feels like shadow. So what do we do between there? I say I've got the value of this. This is very close to this. And I have this, which is very close to that. In order to create that soft edge between them, we can use the brush and simply weave the edges together like this. And when we weave those edges together, we have that feeling of shadow. Now look what I did there. We started out with the red violet. We added the yellow green. By adding the yellow green to the red violet, we reduced the intensity, and we began to feel a little bit more of that light coming through because of the yellow and the green. So this is what we did here. We added a little bit of, went across and added the complement of yellow green and a little bit of the blue, getting it cooler, and the complement, and then we get this. Now, if we want to make it lighter rather than adding white, why don't we add what we would consider more sunlight to it? Why don't we go over and add maybe a little bit more of what would be closer to yellow orange, and that would be maybe this color right here. So if we then do that right in here, then we get that light. And that light then helps to enhance the shadow. So just those few little things of not approaching it as a formula, but thinking it through according to the way color behaves. And one way we can tell how color behaves is how it behaves on the color wheel, what happens when complements go together, and what happens when it gets lighter or darker. And then we take that knowledge and then we use what we know about what the brush will do. We know that when we move the brush between, and it doesn't have very much paint on it, sometimes no paint at all, move the brush between a light and a dark and just sort of weave those two together, then we get those soft edges that we notice, that we see here, where the edges of the shadow actually disperse into the light. So try doing that as an exercise where you're not trying to necessarily paint shadows on the beach, but you're doing an exercise to learn how to do the techniques in order to be able to translate what your eyes are seeing. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.